in the peak of the battle that will determine the fate of the kingdom, there was a messenger got dispatched to go over the hill and calling the reinforcements who were waiting to get the signal to come and turn the tide of the war to their favor. Along the way, the rider, as he left the clanging of swords and the smell of blood, his horse tripped and was now lame. What had happened is that that morning, the blacksmith that was in charge of all the horseshoes was short one nail. So, for want of a nail, the horseshoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. All for want of a nail. It was about a year ago, about the same time now, that we got called by a tier 1 automotive manufacturer that was supplying electronic components to Tesla. Elon Musk was ramping up his Tesla 3 very aggressively, even building up a tent next door to his factory. And so he's pressuring his 10,000 or so suppliers to pull in their delivery dates, and not only that, but also increase their volume. So the pressure was enormous on all the suppliers, including our callers. So we went out there, and we weren't there 2 hours when their electronic component factory, their line, shut down. What had happened is that one of their automated machines was running low on a very special adhesive that was coming from Japan. And they only had about 3 days left. So imagine the panic. The engineers gathered and they explained that this particular adhesive runs out a lot, and even though they had gone to purchasing and put a 0 at the end of their quantity that they wanted, so they did a 10-fold of their supply, they were still running low. So all the people that had to stay up late, calling Japan, how many children did not get their kiss goodnight because their parents were in the factory dealing with some emergency. So as Elon mentioned in this podcast of the Recode Decode, that year was particularly bad. He called it production hell, because not only did he have to manage the internal processes inside his factory, but also coordinate the arrival of parts from 10,000 of his 10,000 suppliers. So he learned the hard way, which us industrial engineers know, that you're only one part missing short of shutting down your line. So that's what we do in Leonardo Group, is we make sure that factories run properly and that the supply chain is done correctly. So how many times have you started to make dinner only to find out that you're missing an ingredient? Clap once if it has happened to you. So it happens a lot. And there's, in the case of our friends in electronics, there is an easy thing that could be implemented, which is basically build up a material buffer of your inventory. So perhaps I might have, by design, this is key, by design I might have 1 day of inventory in my workshop I'm going to set up maybe 2 or 3 times that much in this supermarket, which is known in the industry, and maybe 5 to 10 times that in the warehouse. So if I count the 15 days worth of material in the warehouse, 5 days in the supermarket, and 1 day in the shop, I could still run 21 days without this material coming in. So if you're importing from Japan, like these guys were, little can like this, pretty ridiculous, that they were hold up the Tesla 3 production for a little can of adhesive. But it happens every day, and it probably happens to everybody that is in manufacturing. And so the important thing is to create those policies. So do that on purpose. So set up your days on hand inventory to be greater than your lead time that you will receive your material. So what this does is pushes the emergency, like these guys had an emergency at the line when the machine was calling that I'm running out of the adhesive. What this does is pushes the emergency to the warehouse. So now whenever this warehouse signals that they're running low, you still have the rest of the little internal supply chain inside your factory to go to beat the lead time. So this adhesive comes from Japan, and somebody signs it up in the FedEx, and then it gets lost in the facility. How many of you have lost stuff from FedEx? Clap your hands once. Yeah. So what if the receiving dock and everybody that touches the material could have a plan as to what to do with every single part that shows up? So how do I know where to take it? How do I know when to replenish it? How do I know if it requires any special handling or perhaps special environment? So this very special adhesive turns out that it needed to be refrigerated. Who knew? Well, it comes in a box with dry ice, and sure, it'll make it through from Japan, but it still has to go to customs, and this dry ice is disappearing. So if you're not ready with the correct environmental conditions for your material, then you're gonna kill your factory again, but for different reasons. So all that work that was done to expedite the material from Japan would have been for naught. So what we want to do is create this profile for every part that shows up in our factory, regardless of where it comes from. So we're going to start building up a database, also known as a spreadsheet, where we bring in information from our materials resource planning, your ERPs, any documentation, supply chain mapping. What this all means is that you need to ask yourself some really obnoxious questions. Where is it coming from? How much do I need? Where does it go? Where do I put it when it shows up? Do I need any special handling? Yeah, do I need any special training? So the supply chain has 7 rights. So any operation requires the right material at the right time, in the right location, in the right container, in the right quantity, in the right quality, and at the right cost. And by cost is handling cost. So don't go buying a robot to deliver one single part. And if you have money to buy a robot, call me, because I have better use of your money to reinvest and make it more efficient. So as an industrial engineer, we look at all that. So as we're building up this database, it becomes sometimes painfully obvious of the gaps that we have, because the ERP guaranteed has a lot of blind spots. You don't have the tribal knowledge, for example. You don't know necessarily the replenishment rates, the consumption at the shop, if it's special for some project. So every hole that you might have here represents a risk. So you might be lucky that this one time the conditions in the shop did not cross this gap. But again, like Elon Musk said, you're only one part missing away from shutting down your factory. Okay? So this turns out this is basically building your DNA of the material flowing through your operation. You don't want faulty DNA. Yes? So what kind of things could we do? Let's look at columns of the different categories that we might consider. And again, these are really boring, but you got to do it. Regardless of where you're coming, which country of origin. Yes? Because if Elon said it, it's true. So what kind of categories could we have? So what part it is, what kind of container does it have? What's the quantity? What's the cost? You have the ABC codes, you know, the A being the large pieces that you don't know what to do with when they show up. Maybe they're very expensive, you don't want to buy too many of them. And on the other spectrum, you have the C level of material, which is just the disposables and hardware and these kind of things. You don't need to lock it up. So you can define them as A, B, or C, any particular part. You could have any special handling or environmental. And this in the third column we have there are frozen. The conditions that we need to have some special handling. Do you need a forklift? Do you need a hand truck? Does this part belong to a kit that is also running out because you don't have this particular part? Does it have to be in any particular sequence? Where does it come from? If it's coming from Houston, Texas, and it's August of 2017, just as Harvey is building up strength, and your lead time is longer than anything that it can do for you, then you're in trouble. But your ERP is not going to tell you that, necessarily. If you're running it from Mexico and you have my family there, you're in good hands because they're done and they're going to be in the mariachi band. But if you're coming from Japan, in this particular case, is it coming from Osaka? Is it coming from Tokyo? Or is it coming from Kyoto? It could be a little typo there. Somebody does your procurement person know the difference? And you might end up with a product that, especially for tier 1 automotive, you don't want to mess with that. That material may not even be qualified. So you end up with material that is not qualified to be there, is late, you don't even know where it is, where it goes, and it's already hot, so it's ruined, and Elon Musk is really pissed off. So, very simple tool, just a database, it's a spreadsheet, but it really forces you to think about these really obnoxious questions. And as an industrial engineer, again, I'm here to ask those questions and to poke holes at your logic, your policies, your your methodologies that you might have internal to the supply chain inside your own operations. This is, whether you are aware or not, you're probably not aware of it, but this is a huge competitive advantage, as boring as it looks, because most companies, even the very large ones, don't do this, which is why these guys that were supplying the Tesla 3 ramp, they were still running out of what they needed. They're shutting down their production. So, huge advantage. So, like that book says, that it's not the big that eats the small, it's the fast that beat the slow. Doesn't matter how much money you have, if you can't deliver, it doesn't matter. So, huge competitive advantage. So, with this in mind, ask yourself those obnoxious questions. And don't lose your kingdom for want of a nail. Thank you.
All right, and if you have any questions, he'll be out here at the table right out here if you'd like to ask him anything.
Thank you.